Hello, darling cherubs. Today we are going to be learning about how to take all the information you did and all the research you gathered and how to turn it into your ebook. So at this point, based on what we've learned so far, you should have a formatted ebook that's created using Google Slides. So based on the last video, you should have changed the size of your slides so that they were 8.5 by 11 inches. So you can see that I've done that in this example presentation. And then you should also make sure you've set up a table of contents with your chapters listed, and then at least a page for each chapter. You might need a little more, and that's okay. And then you want to have a page for your sources. So today's task is going to be to make sure all this is done, and then also to complete chapter 1 of your ebook and to complete your source list. Now, normally, if we were at school and had more time, I would teach you about how to do what's called an MLA bibliography. But because we are limited on time, what I'm going to ask you to do instead is a little bit simpler. So I'm just going to ask you for your sources to go into your ebook research notes. So here are some sample notes I have. And in the ebook research notes, you already wrote down the title and author of each of your articles and the link. So you're just going to basically copy and paste that as your source. So this one has a really long title, but that's okay. You're going to take your title, you're going to make sure that if it's an article or if it's a short video that it's in quotation marks, and you are just going to paste it into your source list. You're probably going to want to click paste without formatting, and I'm seeing right now the size is really big, so I'm going to change the font size to maybe 12 or 14. It might be a little hard for you to see it on your Chromebook screen as you're editing, so feel free to make it a little bigger so you can read it. And then you're just going to make sure you put the title of that article, and then you're going to put the website link next to it. So what you can do is either you can paste the entire link, or because sometimes the hyperlink can be really long, you can instead just write the word link all in caps. And then you can go back to your research notes. You can copy the link. So you would have to click on the link itself and click on the URL, and then you'd go back into your source list of your ebook, and you'd write the word link in all caps, highlight it, and then click on the hyperlink icon right here, and then you would just paste the link. And that way it automatically makes it so that if I click on the word link, then I will be taken to that article. Okay, so your source list should contain all the sources that you use to take your notes on your subject. So if you research child labor, every article you read should be listed here under sources. So that's part one of your task today. The other part is, as I mentioned, to actually start composing your chapters. And you're going to want to finish chapter 1 today. So chapter 1, no matter what subject you chose, whether it was child labor or whether it was sexual harassment or whether it was animal abuse, your first chapter should be what is, and then the name of that thing you chose to research. So for me, if I'm doing child labor, my chapter 1 title is What is Child Labor? And I'm not just going to put a definition from the dictionary. I do want to include some kind of a definition, but then I'm going to want to give some additional information. So here's what I would do, and I think it can be a useful tool for you as well. So what I would do is I would think about my chapter titles and maybe even copy them and paste them to the top of my research notes and do a little bit of color coding. I know some of you like color coding. So I would go to the top of my notes and I would just paste the titles of my 3 chapters. So 1, 2, 3. What is child labor? Meet Craig Kielberger and how can you help? And I would actually highlight in a different color each of these chapter titles. So we'll say yellow and green and blue, say. And then you're going to actually kind of go through your notes and figure out which notes go with which chapter, because you might find that some of the things you found in your first article would best be fitted into chapter 1 and other things would fit best in chapter 3. So you want to color code and organize yourself. You could also do this using different fonts or using bold and italic if you wanted, but I think color is probably the clearest way to do it. So let's start by thinking about chapter 1. What is child labor? I'm going to go into these articles that I took notes on. I'm going to highlight in yellow anything that I feel like would belong in a chapter called What is Child Labor? So you just kind of want to skim through, and I'm looking here. This one looks like it's a little bit specific to about one person, so I'm probably not going to use too much there. Let's see. I'm going to go down here. Well, this says kids we'll get about 1 rupee a day, which converts to 3 cents. That's probably something that I would include in the chapter about what child labor is. So I'm going to highlight that in yellow. This says that they work while they are younger and are not allowed to stop because their hands and fingers are tiny, so they make better nuts. So that's also something that probably would be included in my what is child labor definition. Down here under the summary, it says they would do this to help their family with finances. So that's probably also important information about what child labor is. So I'm going to highlight that as well. And so you're going to go through each of these articles that you took notes on, and you're going to highlight in yellow everything that would belong in that first chapter. So this one, 85 million kids are engaged in hazardous work. That's a useful statistic that I think could be very helpful to me in that first chapter. 168, oh, this is a great fact. So 168 million kids around the world are engaged in child labor as of 2013. That would definitely go in that first paragraph, or in that first chapter as well. So after I've gone through each of my articles and figured out what goes in each chapter, then I can actually start writing them. So I'm going to look at what I've highlighted for this first chapter and figure out how I can put it into my own words. And just like if you were writing an essay, you want to have a hook, something that draws the reader in, and then you want to provide lots of explanation and information, and then you want to have some kind of an interesting conclusion. So this fact that we just came across seems really captivating to me. 168 million kids around the world are engaged in child labor as of 2013. Now, if that's not my own words, I'd want to make sure I put it in my own words, but I think that could be a really interesting hook. I could kind of draw the reader in with a statistic. So I could say at the start of my What is Child Labor chapter, I'm going to change my font to something a little bit more reasonable, maybe size 14. And then I'm going to make the alignment to the left. And then might start off with something like a 2013 study indicated that 168 million children were engaged in, I think they called it hazardous work. And I'm putting that in quotes because it was taken directly from the article. So if you have something from an article, even if it's just a word or two that's written exactly the way the author wrote it and not in your own words, you have to put it in quotes. Otherwise, it's plagiarism. So if you need to use a little quote here and there, that's fine, but just make sure you're giving credit to the writer of the work by putting quotes around it. So I could write a 2013 study indicated that 168 million children were engaged in hazardous work. Then I could say something like, this is, or I could say, this demonstrates the vast number of young people who are forced to work instead of going to school. And then I might start going into some of the reasons why these kids are being forced to work and what sorts of work they might do. This would all go in this first chapter, What is Child Labor? If you're looking for a how many paragraphs kind of a response, I know some of you like to know how many paragraphs, how many sentences. My answer, as always, is that I'm not as concerned about how many paragraphs or how many sentences. I'm concerned about quality and thoroughness. So if it takes you 3 paragraphs to say everything you need to say about what child labor is, that's fine. But if you can say it better using 5 paragraphs, then you better have 5. So I want you to really think about whether you've been thorough in answering the question that the chapter is asking. Okay, so your chapter should fill about this page, and you might find that it's useful to have some statistics or an image or something. That's totally fine. Just make sure you format it properly so that the text and the image are together and not kind of one's not hiding behind the other. All right, so your task for today is to do the source list in the way that I described, and then to do chapter 1. If you're feeling like a rock star and you want to work on chapters 2 and 3, knock yourself out, go for it. Remember, chapter 2 should be about a specific activist in your area of study. So if I'm doing child labor, my chapter 2 should be about a specific person who's doing something to fight against child labor, and it should be a young person. So go back to those articles you read and find out who you're going to profile. And then chapter 3 should be about what the reader can do. So hopefully by the end of reading your ebook, somebody who's reading it is going to say, wow, I want to help solve this problem, or I want to help deal with this issue now that I know what it is. So you're going to give them resources and information in your own words about how they can help to solve the problem. Okay, so that's your task for today. If you have any questions, please, 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 instead of sending me an email saying, I don't know what I'm doing, come to office hours or send me a Google Hangout, okay? I am more than happy to help you. But when you send me an email and say, I don't get it, that's not really something I can very easily explain over email. So it's much better if I can actually talk to you in person. All right, I love you a lot. I miss you a lot. And if you have any questions, just let me know. Bye bye.